Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for taking part in this very important meeting this morning about the human rights situation in Iran and the appalling conditions facing the members of the Iranian opposition in Camp Ashraf and Camp Liberty. I would also like to stress the human rights abuses being committed at the mullah's behest against 3,300 residents of Camp Ashraf and Camp Liberty. I find the actions of Mr. Kobler outrageous, and I hope our government will make the point to the United Nations Secretary-General that he ought to personally intervene to replace Mr. Kobler and ensure that the rights of the residents under international law are recognised. One immediate consequence of Kobler's failure is the fact that his actions are making the UK and the European Union lose credibility at this. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, the rights of Ashraf residents to ownership of their movable and immovable property should be reiterated and guaranteed, and Camp Liberty should be declared a United Nations refugee camp where it actually is.
If you look at this platform here, you will see representatives coming from all the countries of the United Kingdom. But you have support right across the spectrum in the United Kingdom. It is as wide as it is deep, and it is as committed as it is both wide and deep. It is befuddling to me that when we hear from UK ministers, and David referred to the response to his debate by the very nice David Lidington, we hear that they seem to have no understanding of the real injustices that are taking place in Camp Liberty. Because when this is all over, when this nightmare is completed, there will be an examination of what people have done in relation to, with or against the mullah's regime. And those who have been complicit in the sort of things that David was describing and Mrs. Rajavi referred to in her statement will be held to account, because in the end, people always are. It may take time, but it always happens.
I'm sure you and I do recall today the year of 1988, when the Ayatollah Khomeini was forced to accept the ceasefire in the Iran-Iraq war. That summer, thousands of prisoners, innocent men, women and children, were murdered in a few weeks based on Khomeini's fatwa. It was the greatest crime against humanity since the Second World War, and it has gone unpunished. But as Lord Carlyle says, the day will come when we shall see it put right. So, Mr. Chairman and my friends, I use this platform today to call for justice to be done to the perpetrators of genocide who are still in power in Iran. And I pay tribute also to my colleague here, Lord McGuinness, who raised a question in my house, in the House of Lords, on the situation in Liberty Camp, and questioned the role and the justice and the judgment of Martin Kobler, the United Nations representative. Many of us look to the future and the time when Mr. Kobler's representations will come to an end. And here again, it is high time that the United Nations took a fresh look at their representation in that volatile and sensitive area. And I commend Mrs. Rajavi and the residents of Ashra and Liberty for being so patient and so tolerant in the whole episode. I want to, before I just finish my short comments, I want to place on record the recognition of the work and commitment over the years of Mrs. Rajavi, as I'm sure all of us do here today. I think we must recognise the NCRI as Iran's Parliament in exile, as the legitimate body of the Iran people, and Mrs. Rajavi elected by that Parliament as the President for the transitional period and as the true representative of Iran.
We think it's about time the governments of the world woke up about Camp Ashram and what has been occurring there, and actually starts to accept the reality that if on the one hand they're willing to argue the case for human rights, rightly so, in Libya, in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Syria, why are there continuous silence about what's happening in Iran? Where people are dragged out publicly and executed in the streets, where people are beaten and dragged away from their families, where people are arrested without any recourse to reasoning and are locked up for months, sometimes years on end. What is happening in Iran is a shame on the democratic world. It is an absolute shame because we close our eyes and lower our heads in respect of what's happening in Iran.
I want to in particular condemn the scandalous actions of the UN envoy, Martin Kobler, who has been exposed as a liar, a charlatan in his treatment of the Ashraf and Liberty residents. He deliberately covered up the inadequacies in the camps, and he continues to paint a false portrait of the conditions in Camp Liberty. When members of Parliament announced that we would like to go to Liberty for ourselves to investigate the conditions there, he deliberately remained silent on Iraq's refusal to issue us with visas. I agree with other colleagues who have pointed out that the role and purpose of the UN for which it was established is to defend the rights of the weak, but it has assisted in the suppression of the vulnerable refugees at Camp Liberty. The UN's role on the situation of Ashraf and Liberty residents has been disgraceful, and I urge the Secretary-General to appoint a replacement. And in particular, I want to urge my government to press the UNHCR to give collective refugee status to all the residents in Liberty, or else support their return to Camp Ashraf and the lifting of all restrictions against them.
Camp Liberty is effectively a concentration camp with atrocities perpetrated on the brave people there by Iraqi stooges and Iranian agents at the instigation of the mullahs. That's what's happening. It's simple. Most people can comprehend it. I don't know why the UN can't. It's time for the Security Council to do what we set up the United Nations to do, to take action against this regime's terrifying human rights record. It's time for them to do something about the atrocities at Camp Liberty.
It seems to me that Camp Liberty is about as inaccurate as you can describe it. You don't make hell paradise by calling it paradise. It remains hell. And that's what's happened to Camp Liberty. It's described as a haven of liberty. In fact, it's a prison. And that's exactly what has been indicated more than once in the course of today. And it was, I suppose, at one time, my reluctant surprise that the PMI agreed to move from Camp Ashraf to Camp Liberty. But after all, it had been a deal brokered by the United Nations. But I don't believe for a single moment what happened was in fact what the United Nations had anticipated, that they would find that something like 100 people have been left in Camp Ashraf to try and protect property which under international law is theirs. And it has been systematically deprived from them by forces and agents of the Iranian regime. And that is what Camp Liberty is. It is a prison. And people thought they were going to go there only, as I understood it, temporarily until they were relocated in various parts of the world. But they are now being used and systematically abused, and we should take great upset to that. And I'm sorry, but Mr. Boumediene is absolutely correct. Martin Kobler has been completely bought. And what we've found is that we're not getting any honest answers at all about the state of affairs in Camp Liberty. And as I've said before, liberty is what it isn't. It's got nothing to do with liberty.
Now, we must be outspoken about the unacceptable conditions, as we've heard. at Camp Liberty, and we should be outspoken in declaring it a refugee centre. Essentially, that will be a fundamental blow against the evil regime that rules Iran at the present time. Now, it's quite clear that the sanctions are starting to bite on the Iranian regime, but sanctions are not enough. We must take strong and decisive action to make sure that the mullahs and the regime that exists understands that it is only a matter of time before they are removed.
We here salute the residents, those 100 or so people in Camp Ashraf. We salute those many more people in Liberty, Camp Liberty. They represent the strong will of the Iranian people for democratic change. It is to the shame of many of us, and certainly our governments, that we have not provided the necessary protections for them as genuine refugees. It is a shame on the civilised world that Mr Maliki was allowed to do the bidding of the Iranian regime. It's a shame that Martin Kobler, as we've heard, is still in his place after being exposed as at its very least lacking advocacy of the principles of the United Nations. We need to send a message to our colleagues and comrades in Ashraf and in Liberty. We are proud of you. You are brave symbols for all of us, and we will continue to do what we can to reduce your suffering and improve your living conditions. Your perseverance has given us hope and encouraged us to believe that with such vanguards, Iran surely will be freed.